Looking at the water here, I can see there's a little caddis emerger right there. I can see a lot of caddis starting to come off. And caddis are one of the most effective of all aquatic insects on all trout streams, including spring creeks. Caddis flies are really essential to have a selection of those with you, and I find that the emergers probably work more than all the rest of the caddis patterns put together. And I have a little caddis emerger that I use that I tie out a partridge hackle and some antron dubbing that really works well for me. So I want to show you how to tie that. Basically, three colors that seem to work for me the best, and I tie one that has kind of an olive body, another one that is more of a tan or amber, and then another with gray. So I tie these in about three colors. And we're going to use the thread to match the body. We're going to do an olive one here, which is the color that I most frequently use. And I'm going to start out just tying the thread, and then we're going to put a little bit of this wire on here for ribbing. And you can use gold or copper strand on here, and we're going to use this for ribbing. This will add to the appearance of the fly, but it also provides just a little bit more weight onto the hook. And that's important because we want the body of this actually to break the surface film so that it floats right in the film. We're going to start out and tie the body on here with some dubbing. And this is an antron dubbing blend, and it works very well because it gives a little bit of sparkle to the body of this fly. And we're going to dub this on very thin so that we can control how much dubbing that we lay on and make a nice tapered body. Also, I'm using a light dubbing and a dark thread, which will help with the translucency of the fly, allowing the thread to show through. And we just wrap this forward about 2/3 of the way down the shank of the hook. And the next thing we're going to do is put on a little bit of antron yarn. Now, this is how antron yarn comes, just in a 4-ply yarn. We only need about 1 ply of this, so I cut about a 1-inch section, and then I'm going to lay this right over so that it extends back about the length of the hook shank past the bend of the hook, and that will be a shuck. And also we're going to use the top part of this as an underwing. So we've tied that right in the middle, and then I'm going to fold the underwing portion of it back so that we've got actually 2 plies facing back. And I have a little comb here, a little fly tying comb, and I'm going to just comb through this and kind of break this up because I want it to be really loose and rough. Now, I've also used Zelon for this before, but the Zelon is a little too stiff. Now, holding the underwing out of the way, the ribbing is going to come into play. And what I'm going to do now is rib over the ply that's facing back to form the shuck. Just ribbing this wire forward. So now we've got a ply coming out for the underwing and one back for the shuck. And we want to cut the shuck to length, and usually I just kind of taper that cut like that. and make sure the underwing is no longer than the bend of the hook. So it comes right back about where the shuck starts. And that's nice, and lots of sparkle in this fly. And the next thing is to put on the overwing, and I'm going to use some partridge feathers. Now you can use grouse, any of these wild birds really make great feathers for the wings. I stay away from the hen feathers of domestic chickens. Sometimes you can buy these hen saddles, they're called, and they look, some of them really look good, but the problem with them is once they get wet, all the fibers of the feather will just kind of clump together, and they're really not going to hold their shape, where these partridge feathers really hold their shape well. Just lay one feather over the other so the curvature is the same way, and we're going to tie this wing short. This is only going to be, the wing's only going to go right to the bend of the hook and no longer. So I'm going to pull some of this rough feather out of the way and then just clump this together. So I got a nice clump of partridge, hold it in place. Now I'm going to hold it right on the top of the hook, and with a down wing, it doesn't matter whether you're using feathers or hair or any other material, one of the challenges is to keep the wing from rolling over the hook shank. And the way to prevent that is to lift the thread straight up, just kind of pinch it with your finger and thumb, and you're also pinching the wing, and then allow the bobbin to go right on over the top and then pull straight down. That way the only tension you're putting is straight opposite of the wing. And about 4 of those and that wing will stay right in place. So now we've got our little wing on there, and then we're going to clip the excess. That's not much of a wing, but it's really all we're going to really need for this fly. And the last thing is we're going to try to finish the head and make it look a little more buggy looking. Right now it looks pretty sparse, and you could add some more dubbing if you wanted. If you do that, I would use a darker colored dubbing, but I like to use peacock. It's one of my favorite fly tying materials, and I'm only going to need a couple of strands of it. Just pull a couple of fibers off this side stick, or you could also use the strung herl, which comes like this if you want. Tie it in by the tips of the herl. Rather than just wrap this peacock herl around like this, which would look good, I want to reinforce it by winding the thread through it. So I'll use my dubbing loop method by forming a loop just shorter than the herl, anchor the loop, and then I'm going to use the cowbird dubbing twister. I'm holding the loop around my finger, and then I'll just come inside the loop, over the herl, and catch the other side, and then I can just roll that until I get a nice reinforced strip of herl, and then make 2 turns is all I really need, and that forms the head. And it makes a much more realistic, buggy looking little emerger with that herl on there. And then I'll tie off the head and we're through. Very simple little fly to tie, but one that's extremely effective. The caddis emerger is really a bear to see, and where it's legal, I frequently use 2 flies, and I will use this as a dropper and use a more visible fly about a foot above it. When I do that, most of the time the trout are going to take this emerger, because it's going to be right in the film. If it's sitting up too high, then it's really not going to be very effective. So you need some of those if you encounter some of the great caddis hatches that I frequently see on some of the spring creeks, and especially the tailwater streams that I fish. One of the most frustrating experiences that you can have is to be fishing late in the evening and have the surface of the water covered with little egg-laying caddis flies and not be able to see your fly. And I've found that a spent partridge caddis is one of the most effective flies to use when this occurs, but it's difficult to see. And so I've tied a fly with a little parachute on it, a little parachute partridge caddis that really solves the problem. And for lack of a better term to call it, I call it an easy caddis because it's easy to see. But essentially it's just a partridge caddis with a little parachute.